What's up guys, my name is Ace, and the Season 3 update is live, and with this, we actually saw a lot of perk and equipment balancing, as well as several quality of life changes, bug fixes, and a ton of weapon balancing. However, just like with every major update, I'm going to hold off on the weapon balancing until tomorrow, since I like covering that in great detail, showing you guys exactly what changed before and after, and that simply takes a lot of time to put together since I'm not just reading the patch notes out for you guys. So in today's video, we're going to be covering all of the non-weapon balancing changes, including, like I said, a bunch of changes to perks and equipment in this game. Also, just a quick note, I'm going to have some gameplay against bots in the background just so I can show off the brand new guns and maps, and this is just so I can get this information out to you guys as soon as possible without having to play for several hours first just to unlock the guns and then get the right maps and everything like that. And without further ado, let's get into some of the miscellaneous changes I noticed with this update. Many of these ones are really minor, like they made some slight adjustments to the attachment filter options. You can see now you have a toggle on and off instead of a checkbox. Then in the firing range, we now have a tactical stance indicator on the bottom right, like we would normally have in game. It just shows you if you're in tac stance or not, which, I mean, isn't really all that useful since you should know if you're in tac stance by simply aiming down sight. But I wanted to point that one out. One big thing that I was really hoping that would be fixed with this update that was introduced with the Season 2 Reloaded update is the latency widget. They broke that with that update. I was really hoping for a fix, but unfortunately, as far as I can tell, that has not been fixed yet. And then finally, for the important miscellaneous things to cover here, they added bonus XP for playing in parties. And the way this works is if you have 2 players in the same group, you're going to get a 25% boost to your rank and weapon XP. If you have 3 players in the same group playing together, you get a 25% boost to rank, weapon, and battle pass XP. And then finally, if you have 4 or more players in the same group, you're going to be getting a 30% boost to your rank, weapon, and battle pass XP. Now, this is quite an interesting addition for those that do like to play in parties. However, at the same time, I can't help but think that this more so feels like a punishment for playing solo. And solo players have it hard enough as is having to fight against squads, and this seems like something that's really trying to force people to play with others. And that's unfortunate, because many people don't have any interest in partying up and playing with others. They just want to play solo, they just want to hop on and play their game. And now, not only are they still going to be fighting against parties out there, since there's no mercenary playlists, but they're also earning noticeably less XP than everybody that is partied up. So just something I wanted to point out there. This could be good or bad depending on how you look at it. And I would be curious to hear what you guys think about that in those comments down below. But now let's get into some perk adjustments that they made with the Season 3 update. And the first thing to cover here is with the Quick Grip Gloves. They increased the weapon swap speed benefit to a minimum of 40% depending on the weapon type. And this is something I actually noticed really early on in this game's life cycle. Even though these gloves mentioned that they improve your weapon swap speed, it actually didn't do anything for you if you were swapping from a standard like assault rifle to a fast swapping pistol like a Core 45, for instance. Like, it would literally take the exact same amount of frames, and therefore you literally just weren't seeing the benefits of that perk that you were using, or at least that portion of the benefits, which didn't really make much sense. Whereas now we can clearly see, even when swapping from an SMG to a pistol, we are able to get that pistol out and firing a little bit faster. So that's an excellent addition. Next up, with the Ordnance gloves, they mentioned they added a 20% equipment field upgrade and killstreak use benefit. However, again, early on in this game's lifecycle, I noticed we actually got this benefit by default, even though it wasn't mentioned in the description. These gloves did allow us to do these things faster. And looking at it pre-patch versus post-patch, it appears all they did here is change the description for it. We're still able to throw it at the same speed pre-patch versus post-patch. It's just that now the perk actually tells us that it does this. And then finally, for the stated adjustments to the perks, we have the Marksman Gloves. And this is something that I discovered as well in my testing quite early on in the game's life cycle. Outside of the flinch improvement for Marksman Gloves, which has always worked well, it was always stated that this improved your aiming idle sway, and yet, based on my testing pre-patch, this simply wasn't the case. It didn't do anything to your idle sway, or at least nothing that I could detect. Whereas now, in the patch notes, they mentioned that they fixed the issue with this, and we should now be seeing a 15% sway reduction, which, if you look at the side-by-side right here, the right side with Marksman Gloves after this patch is noticeably better than without, so this benefit is now working properly. So there we go, those are the stated adjustments to the perks for this season. However, I noticed a tweet today from lunchtime mentioning some additional buffs, and these buffs were apparently mentioned to him in the creator call early this week, which I really tried to attend, but I just couldn't fit it into my schedule, so unfortunately I wasn't there to corroborate this, but I do trust lunchtime. And with this, the one that really stood out to me is with the Commando Gloves. He mentioned that they said this will improve our sprint out time with this update, and also with the Assault Gloves, it just says better weapon handling. However, the descriptions for these are exactly the same post-patch as pre-patch, so it's not mentioned in the description, it wasn't mentioned in the patch notes, and I did some testing with this, and the Commando Gloves are not improving your sprint out time at all. So perhaps this is something that they intend to do at some point in the near future, but as of right now at least, these particular updates are not live in the game. So with that out of the way, let's get into the equipment category. We saw a lot of changes here, and the first thing we're going to talk about is the stun grenade. This one saw some very notable nerfs. The first thing they mention is they decrease victim aim slowness duration to 300 milliseconds, and we can actually see that pretty clearly here. Post-patch, my turn speed gets back to normal significantly faster post-patch compared to pre-patch. On top of this, they removed the aim slowness effect entirely on victims equipped with tac masks, so when you're using tac mask now, you actually don't get any aim slowdown at all. It's only going to slow down your movement speed, so that's a pretty huge buff to tac mask against the stun grenade. And then finally, they mentioned victim movement and aim slowness now linearly scales throughout the stun duration. So at first you're going to slow down a lot, but that slowdown is just going to fade away in a linear fashion over time. And you can see that I'm getting faster and faster post-patch compared to pre-patch as that stun continues to wear off. So there we go, some pretty big changes to the stun grenade. Next, let's talk about the decoy grenade. And this one saw an extremely interesting adjustment that makes the decoy grenades a lot more attractive. With this, after the update, when you throw a decoy grenade, as long as it's active, if you're within 20.3 meters of that active decoy grenade that you threw, you will gain the effect of the assassin's vest. So you'll actually be hidden from the enemy radar, which is definitely a very creative way to buff the decoy grenades. I don't know if I'm really going to take advantage of that a whole lot, but it is worth mentioning. This does work. And now let's get into the flash grenade. And this one just saw some adjustments. Technically some nerfs, some buffs to it, but I would say a net nerf overall. The nerfed part of this is if a flashbang goes off really close to you, like right at your feet, they nerfed the maximum duration of this from 4 seconds down to 3.5 seconds. So it's never going to hit you quite as hard as it could pre-patch, and we can clearly see that in the before and after. However, if that flashbang goes off at medium to longer ranges within its radius where it can hit you, that effect is going to last a little bit longer now than it did before the update. So in general, it's not going to be able to hit you nearly as hard post-patch, but it is going to hit a little more consistently, so you don't have to get it right next to their feet in order to get a pretty solid effect out of that flashbang. Again, overall though, I do consider this to be a net nerf to the flashbang. After that one, the frag grenade saw some noticeable nerfs. The first thing they did is they decreased the inner explosive damage from 250 down to 225, so still a one-hit kill if the enemy's not using EOD, but it is dealing slightly less damage there. And then on top of this, they decrease the intermediate explosive damage, so if you're at like mid-range to that frag grenade when it goes off, they decrease this from 150 down to 130. And that's very important since we have 150 health. In that intermediate range, pre-patch without EOD, you were going to die, whereas post-patch, you'll survive that as long as you were at full health when it went off. Then after that, we saw some buffs to the Thermite. The first thing they did is they increased the tick rate. Previously, you'd get a damage tick every 500 milliseconds, whereas post-patch, this is now every 250 milliseconds. However, in order to compensate for that, they also reduced the amount of damage that's dealt per tick, but this was an overall net buff, as we can see here. Our time to kill potential with the Thermite, if you walk into the Thermite after it's already gone off, previously this was 2 seconds without EOD, now it's 1.5 seconds without EOD, so you have less time to get out of the radius of that Thermite. On a similar note, they also buffed the Thermobaric grenade, and the first thing they did here is they increased the explosive damage radius, as well as the damage values within the inner radius and the intermediate radius. And then on top of that, just like with the Thermite, they did increase the number of ticks that we're going to see every second. Pre-patch, we saw a tick every 250 milliseconds. Post-patch, this is now every 200 milliseconds. The fire damage itself wasn't adjusted, so it still kills in 7 ticks. And this means that now post-patch, we're killing in just 1.4 seconds with that fire damage, whereas pre-patch, this was 1.75 seconds. So definitely some nice buffs here. I may actually consider using this from time to time at least. Next up, the drill charge saw a bit of a buff. And what they did here is they decreased the surface burrowing time from 1.25 seconds down to 0.75 seconds. Therefore, it can get through that wall a little bit faster. There's less time for the enemy to see that indicator and react and get out of the way, which was the primary issue I found with the drill charge in Modern Warfare 3, is I always just found I had way too much time to get outside of the radius, and that made it kind of useless. Now it's going to be just a little bit better than pre-patch. After that, we've got the C4, and the first thing they mention in the patch notes is detonation can no longer occur until stuck to a surface for 500 milliseconds. However, in my testing here, when I throw it and I'm spamming the button to detonate it, it still detonates essentially the moment it hits this wall. It detonates essentially on the same frame as pre-patch with the same throw, and it definitely wasn't attached to that wall for 500 milliseconds before it went off. So I'm not too sure if this part actually went through or not, but as far as I can tell at least, there's no noticeable change here. However, there was a slightly noticeable buff to the C4, and this is your throw velocity. As you can see here, I stood in the exact same point, aimed at the exact same point, and post-patch you can see that C4 travels slightly farther than pre-patch. Now obviously here, I wasn't throwing this at the optimal angle, I just chose this angle because it was easy to replicate perfectly, but just know you should be able to throw C4s a little bit farther now post-patch. And this just leaves us with one last equipment change that they made here, and this was to the Breacher drone. The first thing they mentioned here is they increased drone health from 1 to 55. So now with many of the guns, it's going to take you 2 or 3 bullets to take out a Breacher drone instead of just 1. And also, if it happens to fly by the radius of like a stun grenade, for instance, that stun grenade will not destroy the Breacher drone post-patch. But on top of this, in the patch notes, they mentioned they increased the drone velocity by 25%, so it should be flying faster. However, with this part, based on my testing, this didn't appear to change. You should definitely see a noticeable difference with that 25% adjustment to velocity. So I don't believe this part actually went through with the Breacher drone. In either case, that will wrap it up for all of the equipment changes with Season 3. Finally, I just wanted to briefly touch on some killstreak adjustments and bug fixes here. The first thing is with the SAE, they addressed an issue preventing explosives from damaging players in specific locations. However, they didn't mention what these specific locations were. Then with the Wheelson, players will no longer become stuck firing their weapon if killed while controlling the Wheelson. And then finally, they mentioned the swarm buff that actually took place before the Season 3 update, and this is something I covered, I believe it was last week in a video. I noticed that something definitely changed behind the scenes with the swarm. With these patch notes, they basically just confirmed that this change did happen, and they just mentioned there's reduced delays, as well as increased drone attack velocity and increased drone attack damage range. And there we go, that is going to wrap it up for all of the important miscellaneous changes and fixes that came with the Season 3 update for multiplayer of Modern Warfare 3. Like I said, tomorrow we'll be covering all of those weapon balancing changes because there were a whole lot of them, some very notable changes as well, so I'm looking forward to getting to that one. But of course, this is where I want to hear from you guys in those comments down below. First off, how are you guys feeling about the adjustments that I covered in today's video to equipment and perks and kill streaks? And second, how are you feeling about Season 3 in general so far? If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.